Thank you. Thank you. After everyone, I hope we all had a sufficient rest to be able to engage a next topic of our conversation here. So we would like to start our second session. And first of all, we would like to begin by asking one of the secretaries of the seminar to come forward to provide us with a brief overview of what occurred this morning, so that we can have a new start for our session this afternoon. I'd therefore like to ask Father Hellman to come forward for a brief reaffirmation of the work that we did this morning.
Vocês todos estão recebendo no grupo de WhatsApp o resumo em língua inglesa e em língua francesa. Nós aqui optamos por ler este brief, esse resumo em português também para facilitar um pouco o nosso sistema de tradução. Em nossa primeira sessão, a Comissão Teológica Europeia apresentou uma análise dos cadernos 35 a 45 de Notes Quotidiennes, correspondentes aos últimos 15 anos da vida de Padre Dehon. A leitura foi desenvolvida a partir da perspectiva narratológica, histórica e teológica. A ideia central é que estes textos não são simples registros pessoais. O diário possui também uma função espiritual, formativa e institucional. Ao narrar a própria vida, Padre Dehon seleciona, interpreta e atribui significado aos acontecimentos. Assim, constrói-se no texto uma determinada imagem do fundador, o chamado fundador ideal. Essa imagem não coincide necessariamente com a pessoa histórica de Padre Dehon. Ao mesmo tempo, o texto constrói um determinado leitor, chamado a reconhecer essa experiência como referência para a sua própria vida. Para explicar este processo, a comissão recorreu à distinção de Wayne Bolt entre autor real, autor implícito e leitor. O Padre Dehon histórico é aquele que viaja, adoece, administra e enfrenta as dificuldades de seu tempo. O autor implícito é a figura que emerge da organização dos próprios textos. É o fundador, o homem de oração, a vítima, o pai espiritual e a testemunha da ação da providência na história. Em relação com o leitor, possui, portanto, caráter formativo. Padre Dehon não escreve apenas para transmitir informações sobre sua vida, ele procura formar um determinado tipo de discípulo. Um discípulo capaz de assumir uma visão espiritual da realidade e de dar continuidade à missão recebida. A comissão identificou alguns eixos fundamentais nessa construção. Primeiro é a união com Deus. A fecundidade apostólica depende da vida interior. O segundo é a espiritualidade de vítima. Ao longo dos cadernos, ele parece deslocar-se de uma linguagem mais expiatória para uma compreensão mais ligada à oferta de amor. Nessa evolução aparece também a influência de Santa Teresinha e de Elizabeth da Trindade. Outro aspecto central é a relação entre interioridade e ação social. Padre Dehon aparece ao mesmo tempo como homem de oração e atento às questões sociais e políticas do seu tempo. A reparação não se limita à dimensão pessoal. Adquire também uma dimensão social ligada à reconstrução da sociedade e ao cuidado com os pequenos e humildes. Nessa perspectiva, o reinado social do Sagrado Coração aparece como expressão do amor de Cristo atuando na história. A comissão destacou também a maneira como o Padre Dehon interpreta a história da congregação. A supressão de 1883, os incêndios, as perdas e outras provações são lidos à luz da providência. As aprovações da Igreja aparecem como confirmação da autenticidade da obra por ele fundada. A aprovação das Constituições, em 1923, adquire especial importância, representa a consolidação e a transmissão do carisma para além da pessoa do fundador. A história é, portanto, lida como história da salvação. Guerra, exílio e sofrimento são interpretados em chave providencial e reparadora. Ao mesmo tempo, as notas cotidianas funcionam como instrumento de transmissão espiritual. Padre Dehon lê e organiza autores de tradição espiritual e transforma essas leituras em referências para a formação daqueles que o sucederão. Para o leitor de hoje, segundo a comissão, o desafio já não é o laicismo duro da Terceira República, é antes um secularismo suave que tolera a religião no âmbito privado e a marginaliza no espaço público. Nesse contexto, conceitos como espírito de vida e oblação exigem uma tradução hermenêutica. Também a união mística e a reparação podem ser relidas a partir da restauração das relações feridas. O reinado social pode ser compreendido em chave de justiça e de teologia de pontes. Esses elementos permanecem fecundos diante da crise ecológica, das migrações e das novas fragilidades sociais e institucionais. A Comissão Teológica Africana acolheu positivamente a contribuição europeia, reconheceu a importância das notas cotidianas como testemunho espiritual e síntese da trajetória de Padre Dehon. Também aceitou a distinção entre autor real e autor implícito. A comissão questionou, contudo, o risco de uma leitura excessivamente providencialista. Essa leitura pode espiritualizar o sofrimento e deixar em segundo plano suas dimensões históricas, sociais e políticas. Questionou também a noção de leitor implícito. Identificá-lo simplesmente como uma alma piedosa pode ser insuficiente se essa categoria não for demonstrada pelas próprias estratégias do texto. Foram levantadas ainda questões sobre a atualidade da linguagem do espírito de vítima. Questionou-se também a distinção entre o sofrimento da congregação, interpretado como purificação, e o sofrimento das nações, interpretado como castigo. Outro ponto foi o alcance do conceito de secularismo suave. Por fim, a comissão pediu que a leitura de Dehon considere também a história da missão, da colonização e da chamada missão civilizatória. A discussão nos grupos linguísticos e posteriormente na plenária confirmou e aprofundou essas perspectivas. Houve ampla convergência quanto à importância de ler Dehon diretamente em seus textos, não apenas a partir da imagem biográfica ou devocional construída pela tradição. A proposta hermenêutica foi acolhida como possibilidade fecunda para perceber o fundador tal como ele se revela em seus escritos. Ao mesmo tempo, insistiu-se na necessidade de não separar artificialmente o Padre Dehon histórico do autor implícito. Permanecem também abertas questões sobre a intencionalidade das notas cotidianas. Trata-se de um projeto consciente de formação de futuros dehonianos? Ou essa dimensão pedagógica é, em parte, uma construção do intérprete? Os grupos destacaram ainda alguns núcleos recorrentes da espiritualidade dehoniana. Entre eles estão a união com Deus como fundamento da ação apostólica, a vida de vítima compreendida na chave de oblação e da misericórdia, a reparação como resposta às feridas da história e a inseparabilidade entre vida interior e compromisso com o mundo. Surgiu assim a percepção de que as notas cotidianas não são apenas memória pessoal, podem constituir uma chave privilegiada para compreender a identidade e a experiência espiritual de Padre Dehon. Ao mesmo tempo, sobressaiu a necessidade de uma relação crítica e criativa com este legado. Compreender Padre Dehon hoje não significa reproduzir suas categorias históricas, significa discernir o que permanece vivo e pode ser traduzido diante dos sinais dos tempos. A fidelidade ao carisma exige criatividade sem perder o núcleo da experiência dehoniana. Neste sentido, O espírito de vida de vítima pode ser relido à luz da misericórdia e da oblação. A reparação pode ser compreendida como reconstrução das relações feridas e compromisso com as realidades de sofrimento. A união entre contemplação e ação permanece como princípio para uma presença dehoniana capaz de responder às questões do mundo atual. A discussão mostrou também que essa releitura deve permanecer aberta às diferentes culturas e experiências da congregação. É preciso evitar tanto a idealização do fundador quanto uma leitura prisioneira de seu contexto histórico. No fundo, a pergunta que atravessou as contribuições foi menos quem foi Dehon do que quem somos nós, dehonianos, quando lemos Dehon hoje, e a partir de seus textos, o que somos chamados a viver diante dos desafios do nosso tempo? Obrigado.
Thank you very much, Nilsson, for providing us with this kind of a background to what took place this morning. So we have maybe refreshed thereby our memories. This afternoon we will return to the second series of texts on Dehon's oeuvre, his social writings. Dehon indicates, or there are in the Dehon docs indicates there are 11 texts under Dehon's writings touching on the social. And so the scientific committee has asked the South American Commission to give us a reading of these texts. And the persons presenting us the perspective of the social texts are, first of all, Delio Ruiz, Renato Lima, and Emerson Ruiz. The three of them will be presenting the text. And I'll ask them to come forward, please.
Okay, just a moment because our PowerPoint is not ready. Just a moment yet. Okay, we will start without the PowerPoint, and after, in few minutes, I hope you can show it. Dear confreres, the Dehonian family who follow us by our social media, and participants of the 7th Dehonian Theological Seminar. The Latin America Theological Commission was entrusted with selecting a social work by Father Dehon. We choose the Social Catechism, published in 1898. Social morality has already appeared in earlier writings, especially in the Christian Social Manual. However, in the Social Catechism, it takes one more concise, catechetical, and accessible form, aimed at a broader audience. The research conducted by the Commission of Latin America, following the indicated methodology, is titled, "The Church Will Give Us Her Social Doctrine." The Social Catechism as a catechism of public morality, implied author, mock reader, and relevance today. The book has a rigorous theological and social structure. It is preceded by a preface and organized into 4 parts that, in a certain sense, articulates doctrine, practice, and hope, as we shall see below. The first part, the principles of social and political life, establishes the anthropological and theocentric foundation of society, addressing the purpose of man, the family, the origin of public authority, religion, concordats, and modern freedoms. The second part, principles of economic life, tackles the complexity of nascent capitalism, the socialist threat, addressing labor, wages, credit, banking abuses, taxes, capital, and the corporate system. The third part, social duties, constitutes the practical core of the book, as it presents the duties of various social actors, beginning with the priest, who is called to study, teach, and act. Finally, the fourth part, apologetics, a social history of the Church, extends the catechetical genre to a historical apologetics, presenting the Church as the true promoter of progress, freedom, and the Christian restoration of society. This structure reveals that the first 2 parts indicate, in a sense, what we believe. The third part points what to do, duties of each person in society. And the fourth chapter justifies what to hope for, based on the memory of what the Church has already accomplished throughout history, and converging toward the restoration of Christ's sovereignty over the public sphere. Research methodology, Wayne Both. To analyze social catechism, Commission of Latin America draws on Wayne Both theory, particularly the categories of implied author and mock reader. And the third part, of course, today. During this presentation, this first part will be presented by me. The second, by Father Renato. And the third, by Father Délio. The fundamental question of the book. In our view, the writing of Social Catechism is permitted by a fundamental question. How should a Catholic understand and reorganize social life, political and economic, in the wake of the modern rupture, in the face of the advance of ideologies and the practice that exclude God and the Church from the public sphere? Freemasonry, social atheism, socialism, liberalism, and what is the Church's place in this reorganization? For our author, the crisis is not merely economic, but essentially metaphysical. In the preface, he states that since the 18th century, civil society has been shaking to its foundations, number 5 of the Catechism, and that the Church retains all the words of life to reorganize society according to the needs of God's children. What? Okay. It's the same. I can read these slides here. Okay. Is okay or no? Now I am in the research methodology. Okay, Zé Ronaldo, Father Renato. Okay, Father Renato, please. For our author, this crisis is not merely economic, but essentially metaphysical. In the preface, he states that since the 18th century, civil society has been shaking into its foundation, number 5, and the Church retains all the words of life to reorganize society according to the needs of God's students. Against modern fantasy, the author upholds the social truth. Society, beings, God's work must publicly recognize divine sovereignty in the way it organizes itself. The Church, therefore, does not appear as an intruder in the political debate, but as the bearer of social doctrine, capable of healing the malaise, in French, the malaise, the illness of modernity. Number 1, the implied order. We address 5 themes here. Number 1, the catechetical genre as a strategy for persuasion and formation. Number 2, the context of the work, Father Dehon and social years. Number 3, the order and the composition of the text. Number 4, the metaphysical problem, the confrontation with the modern rupture. And number 5, discursive effectiveness and historical limits. Number 1, the catechetical genre as a strategy of persuasion and formation. The author of Social Catechism presents himself as a master of doctrinal synthesis and social educator. I repeat, the author presents himself as a master of doctrinal synthesis and social educator. By choosing the question and answer catechism genre, a format the author defines as a complete and autonomous social catechism, he establishes a strategy of persuasion based on the theological and historical authority of the Church and the clarity of the answers. Thus, the implied author reveals himself not only in the doctrinal content of the answers, but also, is important, in the catechetical form of the work, in the selection of the questions, the concise and perspective tone, the authorities that he quoted, and the presumed readership, the mock reader. As a trusted moral guide, he offers criteria for the Catholic reader to engage in a public debate about the Church, the faith, and the organization of social life. This author, therefore, assumes an active reader, capable of influencing society and in need of reliable criteria for judging and acting in the political, economic, and cultural spheres. The author acts as an advocate for God's rights, arguing that the state cannot turn a blind eye without falling into materialism and the perversion of its own purpose. In this sense, Father Dehon defends the Church's place in society at a time when anti-clerical movements sought to exclude its influence. Number 2, the context of the work, Father Dehon's social years. To understand this implied author, one must situate Social Catechism within Father Dehon's social years, between 1893 and 1903, according Nota Quotidiana 44/152. Of Father Dehon's 8 social books, 7 were written during this 10-year period. After stepping down as head of St. John College, Colégio San Giovanni, Dehon shifted his educational vocation toward the social apostolate, becoming a social educator and promoter of the magisterium of Pope Leo XIII. The author writes in his diary, "May this little book become a classic, and popularize the teachings of Leo XIII." Written against the backdrop of Christian Democratic congresses, seminarium gathering in Val-de-Bois, meetings with the Third Order of St. Francis, and other debates, the Social Catechism reveals an author-inept work, attentive to the question of his time and drawing primarily on the magisterium of Leo XIII, as well as on authors such as Kettler, Leon Armel, Manning, Gibbons, Windshorst, and others representative of social Catholicism. Each session concludes with an extensive bibliography highlighting the author's field of research and the role of social Catechism as a link to the social magisterium of the Pope and to central works of nascent Christian sociology. The author expressed deep satisfaction with the institutional and ecclesial legitimization of the work, noting the various letters of support received from the French episcopate. This reinforces the image of an author who writes in communion with the hierarchy. Number 3, the author approach to the text. The author's pastoral flexibility is particularly evident in the composition of the text. When addressing the concordats, for example, he navigates between the ideal of a full Catholic society and the reality of a society that has lost its religious unity. This stance demonstrates that social action must respond to times and circumstances, number 1 of the preface of the Catechism. At the same time, Social Catechism tackles difficult issues: wages, taxes, banks, interest, the stock market, capital, etc., with a solid intellectual grounding. For this reason, the priest is called to study, to teach, and act. Number 241 of Catechism. Serious study emerges as a prerequisite for the social apostolate. The author of the work seeks to address the questions that troubled Catholics the face of social transformations on his time. He answers questions from Catholics and prepares them for the debate. He interweaves theological reflection with a very traditional expository model, namely the Catechism. The 4th chapter, the longest, highlights the text's apologetic intent to offer people arguments in defense of the faith and of the rights of the God and the Church. Number 4, metaphysical problem, confronting the modern break. This reading leads to the metaphysical core of the work. For Dehon, modernity enters into crisis when it expels God from public sphere and attempts to organize society as if religious were merely a private matter. Therefore, the social problem is not reducible to capitalism, socialism, or the labor issue. It touches upon the ultimate foundation of the human coexistence. Within this framework, the implied author argues that society, being God's creation, owes him social worship. The Church is not present as private institution or an intruder in the political debate, but as moral, educational, and civilizing force necessary for peace, freedom, and human progress. Discursive effectiveness and historical limits and conclusion of the first part. In assessing the effectiveness of this implied order, we perceive a figure who is both steadfast and compassionate. He bases his argument on three complementary pillars. Number one, moral reason. Number two, church doctrine. Number three, concrete social experience. Moral reason, which appeals to the sense of natural justice and dignity of the worker by interweaving moral, economic, and social arguments. Number two, church doctrine, grounded in the magisterium of the Pope Leo XIII, particularly Rerum Novarum, which confers legitimacy upon him as the Pope interpreter, preacher, and phonograph of the Pope. Number three, concrete social experience, which manifests itself in the description of workers' conditions and in the critique of the political system of socialism and liberalism. However, our academic analysis cannot ignore the historical limitations of this textual construction. The implied author of 1898 operates from a hierarchical, organic view of society, grounded in fixed roles. To the contemporary reader, the emphasis on the employer-worker relationship based on a professional family may sound like social paternalism. There is no denying that the author has a paternalistic view of society, in which the boss, the owner, is encouraged to be a good father, like Leon Armel. We conclude this part, therefore, that the implied author of Social Catechism contributes to popularizing in a catechetical form central themes of Leo XIII. Teaching, social teaching, which would later be taken up and expanded upon by the following social doctrine of the Church. He combines the authority of the teacher of doctrine with the gaze of the shepherd attentive to the threats facing his flock. Although marked by hierarchical and paternalistic view of society, his text retains moral strength, ecclesial fidelity, and the ability to interpret the reality of his time. Now the second part, the mock reader.
So I will talk about the second point of our test, the mock reader of the Social Catechism. Continuing with the linguistic hermeneutical method proposed for this seminar, it's essential that we consider who the mock reader of the Social Catechism is. Thus, the question we seek to answer is, to whom is the implied author speaking? This section is organized around three parts. The first, Dehon, a writer addressing a mock reader. The second, the identity of the mock reader. And the third, the mock reader of a catechism as a literary genre. First point, Dehon, a reader writing to a mock reader. Father Dehon considers the Church's doctrine to be permanently valid. We read in CSC number 5, the Church will give us her doctrine. But historical developments raise new questions. The Church's mission to preserve, explain, and define revelation is not without its challenges. Society has its problems and situations to which the Church cannot be indifferent or negligent. In the Social Catechism, Father Dehon has in mind a sensitive reader capable of contemplating the architectural, as a holy and marveling at every detail. Father Dehon, as an attentive reader, invited the mock reader of his work to contemplate what he himself contemplates, a solid doctrine. Thus, Dehon's mock reader seems to leave no room for the reader's criticism, since everything is perfectly articulate. We were in possession of the truth about God, the Trinity, the incarnate Word, redemption, the Church, its authority, and its sacraments. It's worth noting that Dehon offers his mock reader a catechism, a test that in and of itself provides information on the truths of faith as they relate to social issues and requires the ability to interpret and embrace them. In this context, with socialists, anarchists, collectivists, or liberals, the Church offers for all its social doctrine. Identity of the mock reader. Father Dehon addresses primarily a Catholic with a certain level of education, living in France in the late 19th century, but not exclusively. CSC is a more universal book and less geographically specific than social manual. Some characteristics of this mock reader. He may be a Catholic priest, educator, or laborer. He may belong to the equal middle class or be a worker committed to social cause. In CSC, the reader's identity can be outlined based on the various social actors mentioned by the author, especially in the third part of the work. The implicit vocation is that of a Christian engaged in various spheres of social life. It all begins with the family prior to social life, the nucleus that society must protect, respecting its autonomy, stability, and the authority received from God. These groups, the families, communities, professional associations, and others. The test also appears to address magistrates and public authorities who must conduct themselves as Christians, recalling that obedience to civil authority is valid only within certain limits, never in contravention of God's law, and that the faithful should, in difficult matters, defer to discernment of those who hold authority in the Church. It also addressed teachers and cultural educators by maintaining that education has the mission to instruct the reason, form virtue, and create the habit of obeying authority, and that teaching cannot do without a religious reference. An alternative view, by the way, of the mock reader is offered by Giuseppe Toniolo, who wrote the preface to the Italian edition of Social Catechism, and in his preface to Dehon's work, he introduces it and suggests the mock reader for the work. For him, the mock reader is a simple lay person who must be introduced to the church social teaching. In his words, it's true that it's more difficult to present the breadth of truth in a way accessible to uneducated minds than to expound scientific theories to scholars. Toniolo's statements reinforce the identity of the mock reader as a Catholic layperson. Whatever, it's questionable whether someone with little education would understand the work, while C.S. CSC was not intended for the intellectual elite. It was also not easily accessible to general public. Dehon's mock reader is someone capable of understanding basic Christian doctrine, somewhat familiar with church history and the major concilios, able to follow the social language of the papal encyclicals, especially those of Leo XIII, but also those of Pius IX, and aware of the consequences of the French Revolution and its repercussions. Therefore, while on the one hand the implicit author envisages a rather simulator is a worldly of social tensions, of the other he conceives of a reader capable of navigating the complex apologetic journey of the fourth chapter. In a sense, CSC is a kind of moral tutorial for understand the New World Choose doctrine. The author reinforces his conviction is on apologetical work against socialism, communism, and materialism, things to be combated. In summary, the mock reader envisioned by Father Dehon is an educated and consistent Catholic with a certain degree of social engagement and a critical stance toward socialism and materialism in late 19th century France. He is someone who values doctrinal precision, respects ecclesiastical authority, and is motivated both by the search for doctrinal, social, and economical truth. The mock reader of Catechism, literary genre, in the late 19th century. During the time when Father Dehon lived, and it is very important, other catechisms were available to readers. The presence of this literary genre reflects a society seeking greater conceptual clarity amid intense cultural and social transformation. This is why the catechism genre had expanded beyond ecclesiastical circles to address topics on the fringes of the faith as seen in the French Republican Catechism, the Constitutional Catechism, the Patriotic Catechism, and various others. This project is demonstrated an effort to consolidate new ideas, create social groups with coherent doctrines, and develop well-funded responses to common debates during periods of great social upheaval. Father Dehon writes with this reader in mind, one who, lacking access to specialized books and the time for in-depth study, seeks clarity and synthesis. Having understood the identity of the mock reader, we will now address the possible relevance of the Social Catechism in the current context.
The relevance of the catechisms today. Considering the analysis conducted above, we now highlight certain aspects of the relevance of the catechism in the contemporary context. Although drafted during a historical period marked by the social transformations characteristic of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the text presents principles and insights that, through some hermeneutics, continue to offer important criteria for reflection on the life of the Church today. The relevance of catechism today can be analyzed from three complementary perspectives. First, the social dimension. Second, the ecclesial dimension. And third, the congregational dimension. Social dimension. Society and the state that organizes it exists for the sake of the human person and must value their integral development. It was not society that God had in mind first, but man, adding that God did not make man for society, but made society for man. Social dimension. Civil society is presented as a necessary instrument for individuals and families to achieve fuller development. It must protect people and prevent them from being violated, oppressed by others. The mission to protect the human person in his dignity and rights, not to enslave him. This assertion rejects any conception of social organization that reduces the human person to a mere instrument of economic, political, or ideological interest. Today, these principles are highly relevant to the global social and political debate, though with particular force in the Latin American, African, and Asian context. The Catechism significantly anticipates principles that would later be developed more systematically by the Church's social doctrine, especially in the social encyclicals and in contemporary magisterial documents. The purpose of political authority is often undermined when state structures fail to fulfill their fundamental mission. One of the most serious factors compromising the functioning of public institutions is corruption, the perversion of the state's public function. Corruption also generates a structural effect. The purpose of political authority, now we pass to the social dimension. The text reminds us the legitimacy of political power depends on its genuine commitment to justice, transparency, and service to the citizens. The Catechism recognizes the importance of corporate regimes, associations, unions, which have their own role in the organization of social life. Society is constituted by a network of relationships and institutions that foster cooperation, solidarity, and citizen participation. They are guided by the common good. The appreciation of these intermediate structures also helps to avoid two equally problematic extremes. On the one hand, individualism that weakens community life, and on the other, the excessive centralization of power in the state. Now, the second dimension, the ecclesial dimension. What is the church's place and legitimacy in the new world? It was not society that God had in mind first, but man, adding that God did not make for society, but made society for man. The family as a fundamental nucleus of society. The family precedes the state and constitute the primary space for human, moral, and religious formation. It is within the family that the person develops their identity and establishes the first relationship of solidarity and responsibility. The Church's pastoral context. Throughout the world, many families face significant challenges arising from economic crisis, migration, social violence, wars, and the fragility of social protection structure. The family has a privileged space for evangelization and human formation. The Church values the defense of the family despite the multiple ideologies surrounding this issue. Church possesses not only the right but also the duty to take a stand against the injustice present in social life. Elements that stand out from the Catechism are the prophetic dimension of the Church's mission, the centrality of the family in the organization of social life, collaboration between the Church and society in promoting the common good, and the importance of the social formation of the faithful. The Church's moral authority leads it to denounce injustice law, condemn from the tyranny, and defend the dignity of the human person whenever it is threatened. A particular relevance in the Latin American context. In various historical situations, ecclesial community, pastoral agent, and church bodies have played a significant role in the defense of human rights, the struggle for democracy, and the denunciation of injustices. The value of formation of Catholic, the text does not limit itself to presenting theoretical principles regarding the reorganization of society, but seeks to form the moral conscience of the faithful in the face of social realities. Father Dehon demonstrates a pedagogical concern, offering Christians tools for reflection that allow them to understand the challenges of the world in the light of faith and the tradition of the Church. The social educator, formation of consciences. The emphasis is placed on our knowledge of Christian social morality. Catholics cannot remain indifferent or uninformed regarding social issues. A pastoral dimension of the Catechism, it justifies the Church's presence in social life. Father Dehon writes not only as a theologian or sociologist, but as a pastor, attentive to the concrete needs of the people of God, such as education, social assistance, and the defense of human rights. The fourth part of the Catechism, by taking an apologetic character, that is, defending the legitimacy of the Church's social mission in history, is particularly relevant today. By taking an apologetic character, that is, defending the legitimacy of the Church's social mission in history, is particularly relevant. The Church is not merely a private spiritual reality, but an educational force that from the earliest days of Christianity through the Roman Empire and the various stages of history has contributed to forming consciences. protecting human dignity and guiding society according to the truth of the gospel. The Church's social action should not be limited to the liturgy, private morality, and internal life. Father Dehon asserts the opposite. When society is shaken to its foundations by ideologies and crisis, the Church is called to offer criteria, discernment, and action in favor of the common good. A renewed apologetics is necessary ad extra and ad intra. Finally, the congregational dimension. Reflecting on the certain aspect that directly challenges the life and mission of the congregation in the current context, the Catechism recalls the importance of the social formation of the faithful and demonstrates Father Dehon's concern for teaching the Christians the principle of social morality and the organization of society. In many current contexts, the Dehonian religious exhibit a certain deficiency in the systematic teaching of the Church's social doctrine to the Catholic people, contrasting to the founders' common practice. Declining interest in social issues in some sector of the congregational life, Dehonian spirituality have always been deeply linked to sensitivity to social and economic realities. For Father Dehon, contemplation of the heart of Jesus led to commitments to transforming realities of injustice. Looking back at the history of the congregation, it is enlightening to see how Father Dehon's social apostolate sparked controversy even in our early days, as is well documented in the letter that Father Germano Blancal. Father Dehon acts as disciple of Leon XIII and addresses new issues, showing that there is not truly human reality that does not find an echo in the heart of the Church. Looking back at the history of the congregation, it is enlightening to see how Father Dehon's social apostolate generate controversy. Considering this criticism of the founder's social apostolate, is it not possible to imagine that today there is a new Blancalism? That is, a tendency to exclude major issues of the day from ecclesial and congregational debate. Coincidentally, the letter from Father Blancal and his companion was written in the same year that the Catechism was drafted. Father Dehon chose to continue in the apostolate and in social formation. In Souvenirs, when addressing the social apostolate, Father Dehon states, "But here too the work must continue." Many of the questions answered by Father Dehon in Catechism remain relevant today, but many new issues have arisen, and the theological examination of this topic lies at the heart of the mission of Father Dehon's disciples. The Catechism is an invitation to rediscover a foundational dimension of the Dehonian charism. It recalls the social dimension, the spirituality of the heart of Jesus. In the nutshell. First, defense of human dignity and fundamental rights. Second, criticism of corruption and the function of the state. Third, the relevance of the Church's social doctrine on issues such as education, the family, and social justice. And fourth, inspiration for contemporary pastoral and social action to continue building up the reign of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. The Catechism remains even today a challenge for the construction of the more just social order, grounded in human dignity and illuminated by the gospel. Recalling the author's opening statement, the Church will give us its social doctrine, indicates part of the Church's social mission. The Catechism is and always it will be an invitation to rediscover a foundational dimension of the Dehonian charism. Thank you. I had to read.
Thank you for this impassioned defense of the social dimension of Father Dehon's life, but also for the congregation. We are, I'd say, as a community, we have clearly taken on a social dimension and asking ourselves in what way the spirituality of the Sacred Heart has a social implication for us. And so what we, first of all, really want to thank is the Latin American or the South American group for the presentation of the social dimension of Father Dehon's teaching, particularly looking at the Social Catechism of his writings. We have stayed within our period of time. Our thank you for that, because it allows us and allows the individual groups to have a sufficient time to reflect on what you have presented to us and to find a way in which we can perhaps also begin to look at how we as a community look at this dimension and how, to what extent Father Dehon becomes actual for us in the 21st century. That is the question that we will be leaving you with, but I first of all think that we have deserved a break, so to have a coffee break, and we return here within half an hour, so to continue, first of all, with the presentation by the Asian Commission as a response to the work that was presented here. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. seems
Dois. Teste. Esse é um, tá muito alto. Abaixa mais um. Ainda tá dando microfonia. Tá dando microfonia. Teste 1. Ele vai ficar com... Deixa eu fazer o teste do 1.
Okay. Yes, okay, thank you. Turn yours off. Welcome back to our discussion here. We have had our break. I wanted to remind you that there is a lot of information that is provided for us on WhatsApp. Reactions, any additional information, anything that might help us in what we are doing here, giving information perhaps on changes in schedule, etc. So I would invite you to stay in touch with the WhatsApp on your computer. After we have listened to the presentation of the South American group on the social works of Father Dehon, we would like now to hear the reaction that the theological group from Asia has made to this presentation. So we asked Father Michael Augustine, to provide us with their perspective on the social works and the social writings of Father Dehon.
So good evening to everyone.
Teste 2.
So good evening to everyone. I am here to present the response of the Asian Dehonian Theological Commission to the paper presented by the Continental Commission of Latin America on Dehon's Social Catechism. So with deep gratitude to the Latin American Theological Commission for their outstanding study and the research that they have made on Dehon's the Social Catechism. So we are very grateful to their presentation. And their work is a significant contribution to the understanding of Father Dehon in his texts. And they employed Wayne Booth's literary theory, this implied author and the mock reader approach. And they revealed the pastoral heart and the rhetorical genius of Father Dehon through their presentation. And their analysis shows the Social Catechism is a living resource, not just a historical document. The structure of this short presentation will be in 3 sections. In the section 1, we will see the overall analysis of the Latin American Theological Commission's paper, their key contributions and strengths identified. The section 2, we see the portrait of Father Dehon as the implied author and some key traits that are highlighted. And in the section 3, we have 5 critical observations. They are presented not so much as criticisms, but as invitations for deeper dialogue and further reflection. The key strengths of this presentation of Latin America: bridge between the literary theory and theology. So they applied the secular framework to theological text without distortion. Secondly, there is a deep reading of Dehon's pastoral heart. Through this presentation and research, they revealed his genuine compassion for workers and the poor. Thirdly, there is a clear articulation of Dehon's relevance. The principles speak powerfully to contemporary challenges of today. And fourthly, there is also critical engagement with the limitations. They honestly acknowledge Dehon's historical and hierarchical limitations. The key themes that emerge from this Social Catechism. The 7 significant themes emerge. The first one is church as social educator. Secondly, human dignity as foundational. Thirdly, family as the first society. Fourthly, subsidiarity as guiding principle. Fifthly, prophetic mission of the church. Sixth, there is integration of spirituality and justice. And seventh, church's role in public life. So these are the key themes that emerge from their presentation. And the portrait of Dehon as implied author, how they are presented and identified Dehon as the implied author. So Dehon as popular translator and a social educator. He made the Leo XIII's teachings accessible to ordinary Catholics. Secondly, Dehon as a rigorous intellectual. He insisted on serious study as prerequisite for social apostolate. A priest cannot be without a person of intellect. It should be a person with deep, in-depth intellect to carry out the mission. And thirdly, Dehon as a compassionate authority, a balanced, firm teaching with pastoral tenderness. He is able to balance, be firm and gentle at the same time. Fourthly, Dehon as a defender of church's role. He fearlessly defended the church's right to speak on social matters. And finally, Dehon as a realistic pastor. He distinguished between what is ideal and what is ideal and what is possible. And he adapted to circumstances. And Dehon's threefold argumentation. So how Dehon persuades or convinces his readers in these 3 perspectives as presented by the Latin American Theological Commission. The first one is the moral reason. Moral reason appeals to natural justice and human dignity. Secondly, ecclesiastical doctrine grounds everything in papal magisterium. Thirdly, the concrete social experience describes real problems to create a sense of urgency. So this threefold approach gives the text a persuasive depth beyond mere moralism. Now, a couple of observations. The first observation is the dance and the dancer. The question can be, can Dehon's way of operating inspire us today beyond his specific ideas? The Latin American Theological Commission focuses more on the principles than on Dehon's style, methods, and approach. In Asia, we face different challenges today, the religious pluralism, poverty, caste discrimination, etc. So how can, for Dehon's methods, style, and approach can be made relevant to address these realities of today in the cultural context? And Dehon's persona as translator, bridge builder, pastor engaging big issues. So these are his styles and methods, and how his methods may be even more valuable than his specific ideas. The second observation, tool for novels used in a catechism. The key question is, Can a tool meant for fiction work well for a catechism? Booth's theory, designed for novels, basically a fiction. Catechism is different and it transmits church's teaching. Dehon's voice is subordinated to papal authority. So we need a nuanced approach that respects catechism genre and still find pastoral heart within it. And need to acknowledge text shaped by communal and magisterial traditions. The third observation, the real reader versus the imagined reader. The key question is, how do we distinguish between the historical audience and the textual construct? The mock reader is a textual construct, that is, an imagined reader. The target audience is the real historic people. So the paper sometimes mixes these two. So understanding this distinction helps us see the rhetorical strategies. Was Dehon writing for a specific group or creating an ideal reader? The fourth observation, the compassionate heart and the hierarchical mind. The key question is, how do we honor Dehon's compassion while critiquing his limitations? Dehon had genuine compassion for the workers and the poor, but his mind was shaped by hierarchical worldview. He did not question deeper structures of capitalism. So in Asia, the issues of caste, class, and colonial legacy are deeply felt. So we cannot reproduce Dehon's vision without critical reflection. So we need to discern what is enduring and what is historically possible. The fifth observation, prayer and action, the laity and dialogue. The key question is, how do we integrate spirituality and justice? How do we form lay people as active participants? How do we learn from one another across the context? So the integration is often found missing. The spirituality and action seen as separate realities at times. The laity often seen as the passive recipients more than the active participants. So Dehon's example challenges this false separation. His vision of laity as social educators is prophetic but not yet fully realized. Maybe this international seminar is a precious opportunity for dialogue. How can we put contemplation can lead us into correct action? How can the laity become active participants rather than being a passive spectators? So now the 5 key questions for our further discussion based on these 5 observations. The dance and the dancer. Can Dehon's way of operating inspire us today? The tools for novels used on a catechism. How do we respect catechism genre while finding the pastoral heart? Thirdly, the real reader versus the imagined reader. How do we distinguish between the real and imagined readers? Fourthly, the compassionate heart and the hierarchical mind. How do we honor compassion while critiquing the limitations? And finally, the prayer and action, the laity and dialogue. How do we integrate spirituality and justice across the cultural context? So as a whole, we have a deep appreciation for the work of the Latin America. Their contribution, their presentation is a gift to the congregation, and it reveals the pastoral heart, the intellectual rigor, and the spiritual depth of our founding father, Leo John Dehon. This presentation also demonstrates enduring relevance of his social thought. The 5 observations are invitations for deeper reflection and further dialogue. May the heart of Jesus continue to inspire us in study, prayer, and commitment to building a more just and compassionate world in the person of Father Dehon and through his texts. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael Augustine, for this presentation. certainly helpful to see from your perspective also, particularly from the Asian perspective, how a text such as this that we have studied, which is much grounded in a European context, how you respond to and Asians respond to such a situation. We are now at a point we can begin to reflect on our discussion groups. Once again, as we did this morning, we would like the discussions to be grounded in the following question. How or what we have heard in the presentation and in the response that is important for our understanding of Dehon in our time. So that is the question we ask you to take on in your discussion groups and bring back to us your responses in 45 minutes. Thank you very much.
I would like to ask the secretaries of each group to send to me by email the discussion, because it's easier for us, for our work. And I will write my email address on WhatsApp. Thank you.